What's up, guys? Mason the Brock Henderson here, and this is the Leverage Redemption Season 1, Episode 9, The Bucket Job. So, I was planning on going back to Star Wars reviews, but the next one up is The Bad Batch Season 2, and I need a video a bit quicker than watching a whole half of a season. So I decided to jump back into Leverage Redemption. It's going to be 3 videos, knock out the rest of the first season since I stopped halfway through. So, here we are, looking back into this show, and honestly, it's a good episode to get back into it. Little, yes, unsure of where we are because it has been so long since I watched the first half of the season. There are certain things I remember. There are certain plot points that I remember. I do remember a bit about RIZ and that whole thing going up against the team. I remember a little bit about Harry and what happened with Sophie and with Nate and all of that stuff. Obviously, I remember that Henderson is off doing other things with Leverage International while Brianna is helping our team here. So yeah, there are certain things I do remember, but there are also a lot of things that I'm not entirely sure. Like, I don't remember how much we've learned about Harry up to this point. So to see a little bit more about him in this episode, I do think it feels new. I don't remember seeing this sort of darker side to him from the first half of the season. But then again, I could have just forgotten about it. But what I do like, though, is it feels like there's a lot of good setup for these characters for the rest of the season. You know, the main story in and of itself, it's pretty predictable. You know, you've got you've got this caper that they're planning. Obviously, it seems like it's gonna go wrong at some point. They give a little clue whenever Elliot gets his picture taken early on. So you just know that something's gonna go wrong. There's gonna be some moment where things are gonna get a lot more complicated than they expected for something so simple as giving a librarian a nice little send-off by conning him into thinking he's a hero. But for him to turn out to be a spy, I think that was a nice touch. It was a very Leverage type of touch to really up the ante and make things a lot more intense. Now, with that being said, I think how they handled all of the extra stuff, you know, the ending, this whole ledger that they were talking about, I think it was a pretty good setup, and I think how they handled the end, not entirely sure where that's going to go from here because it feels like this ledger would be something that the team would be interested in, but it almost seems like Brianna made it seem like, oh no, it was fake, when in reality there was stuff on it. Like, there still were names on there. So I don't know if they're keeping it hidden, but they're going to go after the people that are on the list later on, because it feels like the people on that list would be pretty bad people and people who need to be taken down. But maybe I just misunderstood how they were describing the people on the ledger. But looking at Elliot's story for this one specifically, we do get a little bit more backstory about him, a little bit more information about some awful thing he went through, this Operation Kansas. Doesn't sound familiar, so this might be the first time we're hearing about it, but knowing that it's affected him to this point where just the mere mention of it and bringing back these flashbacks really messes him up. It is something that I hope we tackle a bit more as this season continues. It's a good backstory for him. It's something that I think is a really good setup, and it's something that I think we need to see paid off, especially with this whole thing where he hasn't seen his dad in, what do they say, 18 years, I think. So to know that that is something that affected him to this point, I think we need a little bit more. We need a bit more of a conclusion on this story. So I hope it's something they bring back up, and I hope it's something that they wrap up at some point. But outside of that, I mean, the stuff with Harry, again, I don't know how much of this has been hinted at earlier this season and how much of it is being brought up now. This whole clear, dark history that he had that apparently he hasn't even told the team about. That's also something I feel like is being brought up. It's interesting. It's got some intrigue to it, but I don't know how much more we're going to see of it going forward. I don't know. This is stuff that's just being brought up, and then we'll never talk about it again. It's something that he's trying to atone for, or if it's actually something that will be mentioned again, something that he did in the past that maybe will affect the team in the present day. But there's definitely a little bit of a rift forming there between him and Sophie, because I feel like Sophie's starting to realize she can't trust him fully because there are still things that he is hiding from them. So I think that's something that we'll probably see a bit more of as the second half of the season goes on. Yeah, all in all, I mean, this episode, it was a lot of fun. I liked what they did. Obviously, seeing LeVar Burton, a lot of fun to see him in this type of role, playing a spy. Also really funny because we saw a couple of references that I did appreciate. We did see, I think Brianna made some reference to Star Trek at some point. And then, of course, for Noah Weil to be talking about a librarian that becomes the hero, how much he loves that type of story. I mean, that's also just a clever little nod to his character on the librarian. So, yeah, I think it was a fun setup. It was a good payoff. It was pretty heartwarming at the end. Maybe wraps up a little too nicely, but that's kind of what I expect from Leverage, though. You kind of expect those happy endings that maybe are a little unrealistic, but they're still fun, and they make you feel good inside at the end of it all. So, yeah, good episode to start back on. I'll move on to the next one, so I'll see you there in just a minute. Now, episode 10, The Unwellness Job. This one was also pretty straightforward. It's sticking to pretty similar formula, I think, as the original show, which I think is fine. I don't mind some changes. I do like the modern updates. I think that's something that I'm really enjoying about the show, is how they've taken a lot of what the original show was about, but brought it into present day. So we're seeing in this one, it's an influencer who's basically using the internet and using algorithms to trick her people that follow her, all of her followers, into doing stuff that is harming themselves. I mean, it's a pretty modern day problem. I mean, you think about how harmful algorithms are in our everyday life. I mean, it's very poignant, I think. And on top of that, the other guy who's involved being a Bitcoin mogul and money laundering using Bitcoin. I mean, it's a pretty good update for the series, I think. But with all that being said, I mean, it still sticks to similar type of formula where team goes in with an idea of what they're going to do, things change. Ultimately, it comes down to a pretty simple bluff that was talked about at one point. The whole, well, what if we just snuck a virus in there? You kind of figure at some point that's probably going to be how they do it. There's this whole plan of what they think they're going to do. Most of the time, it's not going to be as straightforward as they talk about it. So, yeah, it's very on formula. It's very by the books as far as what I've come to expect from this show. But I think there's a certain charm to that. I think if you do it for too long, I think it can get a little too predictable, a little too boring. But because Leverage was only 5 seasons, and this is only the first season of this new sequel show, I don't think it's hit a point where it's become too formulaic and too predictable and too boring. I think about, Bones was a good example that I like to go to, of just becoming too formulaic, because they did it for 12 seasons. Almost exact same formula every single episode for the entire series. It got to be pretty boring. The same old, oh, it's going to be this guy. Nah, it's not him. It's going to be this guy. Nah, it's not him. Actually, it's this guy that we were talking to at the beginning of the episode that we wrote off as a suspect early on. It turns out he did it the whole time. It was just the same thing for 12 seasons. It got pretty dull. So that, for me, is a good example of a formula being overused. For Leverage, because of the fact that we've not seen it for super long, and also the fact that they do change it up in each episode enough to where it is a similar formula. It's a funny comparison, but I like to think about like Phineas and Ferb. Every single episode of Phineas and Ferb, similar stuff happens, but they change up that formula just a little bit to where it's kind of fun to see how the formula changes and what little tweaks are in it. So that's kind of the feeling that I get from Leverage, is that little adjustment. In this case, I think the little adjustment is the fact that, I mean, honestly, Parker was not that involved. She was not a whole part of this con and everything going on. She was more on the periphery, doing her own little separate thing. So to see how Brianna gets involved, how she, I guess, uses some of her compassion. And honestly, Brianna's not one I talked about in the first episode, but I did at least go back and skim through my reviews of the first half of the season just to see what my thoughts were on everything. And I do remember Brianna was one of the ones that she just wasn't really interesting to me. I didn't feel like she was a character that was grabbing my attention. She got a little annoying at times. I think she's still probably the weakest of the group for me, but she's enjoyable now. I do enjoy seeing how she's interacting with everybody. I think her brand of comedy has finally started to warm up for me as well. So to see her in this episode talking to this Melanie girl who's just trying to do her best and is being taken advantage of, to see how that was utilized in everything going on, I thought it was a nice moment for her. And so I'm glad that they are, I guess, giving Brianna more to work with and making her a more likable character in the process. But yeah, all in all, not too much to say as far as the main story on this one. I did love seeing Elliot do the whole beekeeper thing. That was that was absolutely hilarious. But yeah, the case itself, like I said, very by the books, but still fun. Still a good, enjoyable episode. And seeing the bad guys get their comeuppance, seeing the one guy lose all of his money, seeing the one girl who is super famous and love the attention going into Witsec to the point where nobody even recognized her, and those that did basically talked about, oh yeah, that Stark girl. Actually, it was Lark. Yeah, no, it was Stark. Like, to not even be popular enough to remember what your actual name was. It's pretty poignant, and it's a good wrap up, I think, for the episode. I don't really think there's much else on the outside. There's some good, funny moments between the team. The back and forth. We're hearing a little bit more about Harry. He's not really opening up yet with the team, but he is talking maybe a bit more about some of the stuff that he's doing or has done in the past. I don't know if that's starting to play in more to this season. I almost kind of wonder, because there's a point where he was talking about, I'm keeping up on all the evil lawyer stuff. I almost wonder if at some point we're going to find out that he has, because we saw him talking to his, I can't remember if it was employer or maybe just a business partner, but the guy in the last episode, we saw that conversation happen. I don't know if that means that maybe he's thinking about going back to work there. And if he does, is it going to be something where he's doing it because he thinks the best way to get back at them and maybe to stop the evil things they're doing is from the inside? Or is it actually going to be a kind of a flip of loyalties where he realizes he does miss that job? He wants to go back and do what he was doing before. I feel like based on what we're seeing and what he's been saying, it's more likely that he might go back to that job. He doesn't want to tell the team because he thinks they'll think worse of him. But I think more than likely he's going back because he sees that as his chance to take this down from the inside. So that's kind of what I'm expecting to happen based on what the little clues that they've given so far. But then again, maybe it's just he hasn't gone back to take the job. He's just been looking into it a bit more, and so that's why he was easily able to catch the whole money laundering thing. But yeah, a good episode. On to the final of these three. I'll see you there in just a minute. And finally, episode 11, the Jackal job. So this one, I mean, it's pretty cliche. Not anything we haven't seen before. Con woman goes in on a job, falls in love on the job, and then gets sidetracked. And yeah, it's pretty standard as far as that's concerned. I was just talking about in the last one how formulaic it is, but how I'm enjoying the formula. This is unfortunately a formula that I've seen done well outside even Leverage. So it's one of those stories that you see it done so many times, you just kind of get bored with it, honestly. And this was one of those stories. Even at the end, whenever they're looking for the power of attorney and trying to figure out where it could possibly be, I'm sitting there thinking, well, it's probably going to be either with Josephine and the daughter, or it's going to be something to do with them. So the portrait, of course, it's in the back of the portrait. Yeah, all of that was pretty just standard. It wasn't bad. It was well enough done. It was enjoyable to a certain extent, but it just was not. It wasn't anything new. It wasn't a flip on the old story that we've seen done so many times. It was just the same standard stuff that we're used to seeing. Now, getting to see a woman looking back at a lifetime career of being a thief and knowing that where she is right now, having Alzheimer's, dealing with that part of the story was kind of interesting. And I thought we were going to expand upon it a little bit more, but seeing how Brianna helped her and was really there for her through a lot of that, I thought we were going to get a little bit more about that, because as soon as Brianna started helping her, I even had the sense that she's done this before. She knows somebody who has dealt with a similar issue, but we really didn't go too much further in detail on that. So I don't know if that's something we'll find out more about later, or if it's just something we're supposed to know. Yeah, she's dealt with it before, so she's capable of helping Stella through all of this. But that was probably the only, I guess, interesting thing to me, is just seeing somebody who had such a successful career of thieving, dealing with not remembering most of these crimes that she committed and remembering where she left some of these most important things. So, but yeah, the bad guys in this one, I mean, they weren't anything super special. Just a guy who takes care of old people and robs from them, steals their stuff, works with the judge, gives some of the stuff to the judge. It was very standard. And even the way they took him down, it was just a simple switching of the guns. So all in all, it wasn't a bad episode. It just definitely was not on the same level as some of the other ones that I've seen. And even, I mean, the past 2 episodes, I feel like there was enough there to keep me invested. And this one, I was just kind of watching, almost predicting what was going to happen next. So in that sense, a little disappointing, but still enjoyable enough to keep me excited to see what the rest of the season is going to hold. So with all that being said, though, that's about it for this one. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. What were your thoughts on these 3 episodes? Let me know. We can talk about and discuss all that good stuff. Leave a like and subscribe. Future Leverage Redemption. I will see you guys in the next one. Until next time, hope you have a great day. Peace out.